Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think we still have a few minutes, but I wanted to let everybody know one of our speakers is a French speaker, which means if you want to understand what he's saying, you're going to need to scan this QR code and then use your own earbuds on your device to hear the translation and interpretation. So just by a show of hands in this room, who's going to be needing to listen to French to English interpretation? And have you done that already since you've been at the conference? Okay, so can we have the QR code again, please? There we go. My advice is let's take a moment. If you can try it, I hope you have earbuds. This is very complicated. So let's try and hopefully get everybody situated with the translation. And once Dr. Haru starts talking, I'm going to actually ask you if it's working or not. And if it's not, we'll do our own in-room interpretation. It will not be as great, but we'll do it. Yeah, hi. Come on, please. Hopefully this works. Does it seem like it's working? Seems like it's working? Okay. Oh, good. And being translated into French? Or right now it's just English? Okay. So then I think you have to, like it shows you, you scan it, choose your language, turn on audio. So interesting. Okay. So I'm also going to invite people, no pressure, you can stay where you are, but since we're not too many people, if you want to come closer, please feel free to do so. I know sometimes you have to leave, and that's okay too. So I'm going to say it one more time. We have a French speaker on our panel. If you need French to English interpretation, please scan this QR code, put your own earbuds in, and fingers crossed that it works. And we'll just get started in 1 minute. Don't go far, Emeka. Come to the microphone. Yes, I will. No problem. Okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Don't worry, keep scanning the QR code if you need to. We'll leave it up for another maybe 1 minute. But I'm really, really pleased to welcome you all to this session. Thanks for coming to the last session of the day, the program. And thanks for choosing us. We're really excited. We don't think you'll be disappointed. This entire panel is focused on family planning agendas. But before I get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Trinity Zan. I'm Associate Director for Research Utilization at FHI 360 and the Deputy Director for Research Utilization on the USAID-funded Research for Scalable Solutions project. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of speakers who are going to share various experiences and perspectives regarding family planning research and learning agendas. And we want this to be a little bit more cozy. So we have very short presentations, and then we're going to be focused on a chat amongst ourselves and then open it up to you all for questions. For people who are just arriving, welcome, welcome. I need to tell you a logistical thing. We have a French speaker on this panel, so if you need French to English interpretation, please scan this QR code and then you'll put in your earbuds and hopefully it all works seamlessly. At some point we're gonna have to change this screen though, and then I'm not really sure what will happen. But just by way of background, I think we all are aware of the evidence that suggests that in order for research to be effective, it really must be co-created with those who are intended to use the results. This is a fundamental concept to research utilization, research uptake, implementation science. So it's a critical step, but not one that we always undertake as those producing research. However, in the past few years, 3 to 4 years, we've actually seen a real kind of surge in research and learning agendas, particularly for family planning and for various topics within family planning. And I think that that's really exciting. It also allows us to have a conversation about what we're learning in the process of developing these, how they are used, and with what impact. And so that's really the focus today. We're going to dig in a little bit to those questions from various perspectives. We've got speakers representing global and country level perspectives, as well as project, donor, and government perspectives. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. The structure that we're going to do is have very brief overviews of each speaker's experiences with a family planning, research, and learning agenda. And then we're going to have this chat where we have some questions that I'll be posing to the speakers, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So I'm going to just check my notes, make sure I didn't forget to say anything. I think that's it. So I'm going to introduce each speaker as we go through. And so I think I'll go ahead and begin. One last call, if you need French to English interpretation, scan this QR code right now because it's going to go away. Anybody? Okay, so can we pull up the slides for the presentation now? Perfect. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, Laura Reichenbach, who is Senior Associate and Project Director at Breakthrough Research Project at Population Council. And she's going to offer some perspectives regarding a global research and learning agenda. And we have to be reminded ourselves to speak into the microphones, and when it comes to question time, to speak into the microphone so that the interpretation will work and the live feed will work. Thank you.
How do I turn? Anybody know? Can you hear me now? Perfect. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Trinity, and thank you for the opportunity to share today the experience of breakthrough research in the design and application of global research and learning agendas related to addressing key gaps in social and behavior change, or SBC, programming. Breakthrough Research, led by the Population Council, is USAID's global flagship project on SBC research and evaluation to drive the generation, packaging, and use of SBC research to inform programming. The project, which started in August of 2017, is in its 6th and final year. So this opportunity to share reflections on our global RLA process, successes, and challenges is extremely well-timed for us. To advance the field of SBC, Breakthrough Research has worked with a range of stakeholders as partners to identify information gaps and build consensus around priority learning agendas, as well as carry out innovative SBC research and evaluation. So why a global research and learning agenda in this space? Expanding the evidence base for SBC is a critical element to inform programming, and the development of consensus RLAs to prioritize investments in SBC research that is most responsive to programming priorities was an important and identified need for USAID and a major focus for our project for the first 2 years or so of the project. So there was an identified need for an RLA based on the fragmentation of SBC research across topics and sectors, as well as new and emerging research approaches such as behavioral economics that were being applied and are applied in SBC programs and required further investigation. So we were tasked as a project with generating a consensus global research and learning agenda that could be both applied across health areas as well as adapted for specific health topics. And today I'll be focusing on family planning and reproductive health. So this slide depicts a high-level overview of the process we undertook to identify the RLA. I think it's important to note that before starting the process and diving in, we worked in close collaboration with USAID, as well as drawing on previous council experience to set up some parameters for the process, which can be really quite daunting at the beginning. So these parameters included, first of all, the need to be consultative and engage key stakeholders. Secondly, the importance and need to build on past efforts, particularly in the donor and multilateral space, given that this is a global RLA. So for example, USAID's child survival effort in the past, but also to work in collaboration with current efforts by USAID and other multilateral partners. So for example, during the time that we were doing our process, WHO was doing their priority setting process related to SB, social behavior and community engagement for MNCH. So we engaged and communicated with them as an example. And then thirdly, one important parameter that we discussed was making sure that this was generated with purpose and application in mind, and specifically in 4 areas. 1, to guide decision-making. 2nd, to foster collective learning. And 3rd, and I think really importantly, is to reduce duplication of effort. And we talked a lot about the need to be additive rather than reinventive. And then finally, to maximize the impact of research and programmatic investments. So having said all of that, and with these sort of guardrails in place, our process was multi-pronged, iterative, and consensus-driven. It started with a desk review of the already synthesized literature on SBC programmatic research. I can talk more about that in discussion. I don't have time to go into that here. And we had multiple consultations with over 190 stakeholders. It was a very iterative process. I think one of the keys for us was convening consultations with stakeholders across research, implementation, and policy through the convening of technical advisory networks of experts. We also leveraged global and regional conferences and other meetings as opportunities to engage more stakeholders. So for example, ICFP in Kigali was a very important meeting for us to engage stakeholders as we were developing the RLA. So what did all of this get us? So in this process, we identified 6 cross-cutting evidence gaps, and we generated 2 research and learning agendas, one on integrated social behavior change and another learning agenda on provider behavior change. So the RLAs themselves, and you can see the visuals of them here, what they contain is a description of the gaps in evidence, the priority RLA questions, and a description of the consensus-driven process. And at the end, the roles of key stakeholders for putting the RLAs into action. We wanted to really make these, to have various stakeholders see themselves in the RLAs. We took an implementation science lens in our approach, and we grouped the RLA questions around 4 main priority areas for programming that emerged throughout the process. So there's a number of RLA questions for each of these, and I will provide a link to our website where you can get the RLAs and actually go into the questions. So in terms of application, so how did we use these, or how were the RLAs helpful? So in addition to helping us as a project prioritize the research that we carried out, we also use these RLAs as a mechanism to engage implementing partners doing their own implementation research or their own interventions through the production of research spotlights. And these were used to demonstrate how priority RLA questions are being answered and applied by a range of other implementing partners and others working in this space. They're also, the purpose of these research spotlights is to share tools and resources for other program implementers and research partners, and to raise the visibility of the current work that's going on, to sort of get a sense of where the evidence gaps are being answered already through existing work. This is an example of a research spotlight we did with the Beyond Bias project, which is implemented by Pathfinder. And this slide just illustrates the link with some of the priority RLA questions that came out of the provider behavior change RLA, and how Beyond Bias is addressing this in their work. And again, there are links to this on the website. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. So Sarah, I'd like to invite you to come up, and you can get the clicker from Laura. Sarah Nabukira is Research Associate in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Makerere University School of Public Health in Uganda, and is also a research officer on the R4S project. And she will now be sharing the perspectives from a country-based family planning research and learning agenda. And I think we'll hear a lot of similarities, but some differences. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Trinity.
And don't forget to click the slides.
Sure. So I'm going to share a country-level experience with the research and learning agenda. We developed a research and learning agenda in Uganda, and the Research for Scalable Solutions project. Now, this is a USAID-funded project with a consortium, in a consortium of partners, including EVIDAF, Save the Children, FHI 360, and PSI. So this is an implementation science project which aims to improve the efficiency, cost effectiveness, and equity of family planning programs. And it's running in countries like Uganda, Malawi, Mozambique, Niger, and Cote d'Ivoire. So this project operates across 4 study areas. We have young people, self-care, equity, and high-impact practices for family planning. So in Uganda, we embarked on the process for the RLA development, and it was an iterative process with a lot of stakeholder engagement. And we went through a few steps. First, we did a desk review of all the available documents about FP across the 4 study areas of equity, high impact practices, self-care, and young people. We also engaged key stakeholders around the family planning space and went ahead and did a secondary data analysis. From all this, the findings were shared in a consultative meeting. We engaged stakeholders to validate our findings and come up with priority questions across the 4 study areas. And we were looking at engaging the stakeholders because we wanted questions that were going to be accepted, questions that were going to contribute to the improving the family planning policy and programming. So the questions were later presented and validated by the Family Planning Technical Working Group. And so that marked the beginning of our RLA journey. So we had the RLA, and now we were to focus on its operationalization. So to operationalize the RLA, we went ahead and it formed part of the CIP2, and that is the costed implementation plan for Uganda, that it runs from 2021 to 2025. So the questions were tagged to its design, and so we were looking at a broader policy goal. And we are trying to have a strategic shift for total market approach. So our RLA was tagged to the CIP2. We have also disseminated this RLA to the different technical working groups, SRHR technical working groups. we've disseminated the RLA to the research institutions and academia. We want people to be able to contribute, to create, contribute, and use the knowledge. So the purpose of the RLA was to support the Ministry of Health, the researchers, the implementing partners to develop and prioritize family planning implementation science questions that would contribute to Uganda's family planning policy and program goals for the period of 2021 to 2022. So this RLA is a living document. It can always be updated as research is ongoing by the different partners. We can always update it, but it's informing the research activities for the period of 2021 to 2025, and so after that, we shall have it updated formally. The priority questions, as you can see, the priority questions actually are some of those across the 4 thematic areas. That is self-care. We have questions for equity. We have questions about high impact practices and young people. Now, these questions are either primary research questions or evidence gaps that just need synthesis and research utilization. There is a link below. You can refer to that for more questions. There are a couple of questions across all the thematic areas. That is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think already we're doing these really short snapshots just to orient you, and then we're going to dig deeper in our question and answer session. But I think you're starting to get a sense of where things are similar and different. I would now like to invite Dr. Haru, who is the Director General for Population and Reproductive Health at the Ministry of Public Health and Social Affairs in Niger, who will be sharing his perspective as a government and Ministry of Health official involved in this process. And so this is the French part, so if you need the interpretation, let me know. Start shaking your hands if it's really not working well, and we'll see what we can do. Over to you, Dr. Haru.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I'd like to share the experience of Niger. In the case of this process of research and learning agendas, which is an extremely important process for us. Okay, it's working. So for this process, so as we just heard from the other countries that developed it also, so this is related to the family planning topic. So we work with the partners that you see here. We have made a very strong collaboration that allowed us, within the framework of this project, to analyze everything that exists regarding the documentation related to family planning. We also made an analysis of secondary data, and we have made some interviews with the key informers at the strategic level. Because generally, when we do some research, we have the documents, but it's about the subject of the research. So we have got together all of these to be able to generate these data, and so that we could know the stage when we should act. We also organized a workshop with all of the stakeholders, with the civil society, some financial and technical stakeholders, and So as you know, Niger is an extremely religious country, so social norms are extremely important in the country, and there is a gap of quality information for young people. So this process, you know, originated a workshop. We wanted to know precisely what were the questions, the research questions. So we needed to have these data that could be used by the government to evaluate the challenges at the level of the community. Because we have the research on the one side and the government on the other side, but we don't have these communication bridges. So within this process, we wanted to be together and to use the results of this research. We wanted to have very precise questions so that everybody could participate and be involved. That's why we prepared some priority questions. I'm going to quote some of them. And we made a hierarchy, and well, this was thanks to the consensus. So we spoke about the social norms as you just saw it. And the wish to have many children is still there. It remains there. So that's an interesting question. Why do you want that? That's an important question for family planning. And there is a need for young people's information because there is an opportunity there so that the private sector could contribute to these needs and to find some solutions in the health sector. Now, what's the usage of it? I started speaking about it. So when we spoke about the agenda, we had this committee that was in charge of doing the follow-up. So many members were already involved in the process, and since we had finished our first SAP in 2021, we had to create a new one. So this agenda has guided us in the research field so that we could include this in our National Action Plan for 2025. So the idea is to have the analysis for this national plan and to use this agenda precisely to keep going forward and to align our partners in these research subjects. Another thing, another usage of this agenda is at the level of the service delivery, because when we started this process, the key informers, one of the key informers were the service providers. And of course, we wanted to promote at the level of the service providers all of this information to be able to face the local challenges. Okay, please excuse me 1 second. Okay, here we go. So this is the idea of generating this program. And this should be built on proof and evidence to be able to better to face the challenges and to generate some actions based on data. So we have so many resources for these results. So this is what I wanted to say, and I would like to thank you all.
So exciting to hear from a government leader who is very dedicated to and passionate about research. So our final perspective coming from that of the donor, I'd like to invite Emeka Nwachukwu, who's Implementation Science Technical Advisor at USAID, Population and Reproductive Health, Research Technology and Utilization Division.
Thank you, and thank everyone for coming. I'm going to wrap up this little presentation by talking about our experience at USAID. You would have noticed before now that USAID is the common factor in all of the presentations. So we will not repeat all that have been said, but from our own standpoint, we want to able to understand where we are and what we plan to do going forward. By definition, a learning agenda is a set of broad questions about critical knowledge gaps. Oop, what did I do? I'm sorry. Okay. That enables an efficient, effective processes that inform designs and implementation decision making. Such questions, when they are answered, will help to prioritize and establish a plan to answer both short and long-term questions for research. We consider them of highest value across relevant program areas and policy areas as well for field work in family planning. The Office of Population and Reproductive Health at USAID has supported RLAs in the long term to guide projects, to guide country programs at regional and global levels, and investing in those learning activities that helps to prioritize our investments as well. We've funded several RLAs from global RLAs, which has been presented by Pop Council, focusing on social behavioral change for family planning, and country-level RLAs through the R4S project managed by FHI, one of which has been presented as a country-level experience by Uganda. But there are also RLAs existing in Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, Nepal, and Niger that has also been presented so far. Globally, there are two global RLAs that have also been developed. One was on hormonal IUD. 2 days ago, I was in a poster presentation where implementation of this RLA in Nigeria and Kenya has been explored, and we know that some other countries might be interested to use this to inform their investments as hormonal IUD implementation is expanding globally. And also CIMC, by context, CIMC is contraceptive-induced menstrual changes, and the Global Task Force was focused on developing research, learning, knowledge, and measurement activities that helps to explore these new program areas and have both family planning community and that of menstrual changes, menstrual hygiene, to come together to begin to define where there's an intersection between these two. That RLA has been published a few months ago in the literature. As a common feature, all of these RLAs applied same general approaches. First of all, synthesizing existing evidence on all the practices. We had the Uganda experience talking about DEX reviews and initial stakeholder engagements that happened before the process of research prioritization took place. And there's this important aspect of consulting diverse stakeholders, which has a lot of implication on implementation, because several times we do research and they're there in the shelf, they're published, but nothing is happening, they're not being implemented, they're not informing any form of action, policy, decision. We hope that some of these RLAs will move forward towards supporting some of those activities. What have we learned? And these points are not necessarily linked to themselves, but individual little snipers of the experience we've had supporting and managing all of these RLAs. One, we've seen that not just RLAs, research entirely, they're not taken very seriously by several consumers and stakeholders that should use them for activities. We're more focused on implementations. We want to stay in our silos and design programs the way we want them and go throw them out in the field. And back at USAID, RLAs are not typically developed at the level of the missions. And we know that missions fund bilateral activities on implementations. And when missions don't have RLAs, it becomes difficult for them to insist on those awards being managed based on evidence and research. So principally, those researches and RLAs are done by partners, and it's left for the partners to bring those to the attention of the mission health colleagues to ensure that they are used in program implementation. And by extension, we know that attention to research is waning because we want quick results. We want numbers, especially if you're doing programs that the targets are number-based. You want to meet the targets, and sometimes following research outputs might be constraining and holding you back from meeting those targets on time. We know that RLAs have potential to stimulate targeted high-impact research at local and at global levels. If we begin to focus on these research agendas, it already tells us where the gaps are, where the priorities are, and what needs to be done to achieve high-level and high-impact results in those settings, whether they are globally or locally in individual countries. And we also know that there have been inconsistent follow-up with implementation of RLAs, and we are seeing that happening now with the RLAs that have been developed in all these countries. So they're out there, they've been disseminated, and we're watching very closely to see how much of that goes into programming, into policy, into intervention mapping, into service delivery entirely, because that will be the actual and eventual usefulness of those RLAs. Therefore, we believe that this needs multi-stakeholder engagement so that this research output we have here can be translated into action. Thank you.
All right. So that concludes the formal remarks portion of our session. We'd now like to kind of gather around and ask a few more of those probing questions that give us a sense of some of what Emeka was just raising, like what is the impact, what are those challenges, and some questions around process. So if we could turn off the projector, I'm going to invite all of our speakers here. We have a few pre-planned questions, and then we'll open it up to you all. So we're going to gather around. You have to pretend this is a fire, and it's not so hot outside that we wouldn't need a fire. And let's get another microphone. Okay. We'll pass it around. All right. I'm a little worried about time, so I'm going to be choosy with my questions. So I'm going to direct the first question to Laura. And Laura, the question for you is, how rigorous do these need to be, these RLAs? And how should we handle questions for which there may already be some evidence? Over to you.
Great, thank you, Trinity. I think the rigor question is a paramount one. And I think obviously as from the research side, rigor is always what we're aspiring to and sort of the highest standard of that. But I think the flip side of that is you want these to be done and make them accessible in a timely manner. I think just linked with this is this requires a fair bit of resources to do. Particularly if you're trying to be consultative and engage. And so I think it's a trade-off. as with anything, in terms of how long, how long you do have, how much time, how many resources you do have. I think the implementation science lens is a really great way to frame these, because I think you can sort of adjust the rigor around the actual research that you end up doing. But I think the other, and just to kind of link with that, I think the other piece of this is ensuring that you're addressing the research utilization question in the process. And that's one thing I didn't mention. With our technical advisory networks, we had, as part of the process, engagement around who should the audience for this be? What should this look like? What are the opportunities? And again, I think it helps to balance the focus just on the technical aspect of the questions themselves, and you're already prioritizing their use and uptake and application.
Awesome, thanks. I think that it's also worth noting, I think a couple of the speakers noted, but when you do aim to be participatory and collaborative and ask people what their questions are, some of their questions may already have answers, they just don't know that. And so that's what kind of part of this tension too, is do you say, oh, that's a nice question. We already have information about that. We're not going to put it into this research and learning agenda. That would be very demotivating. Instead, I think at least on the R4S side, those questions went in with a realization that now there needs to be efforts to synthesize and disseminate that research. So there's some tension there, though, because I think when other people look at it, they can say, why do you have this question in this research and learning agenda, which is interesting. Sarah, over to you now. How do you know if these research and learning agendas are being used? How should or can we actually measure the use of these research and learning agendas?
Okay, so speaking from the country level experience, in Uganda we've come up with a monitoring tool, tracking tool, to track the use of this RLA. This document is being used under the MOH and the Ministry of Health, and so it indicates the priority questions, that's one, but also it indicates who is using the questions, who is implementing the questions, which questions are being implemented, what is the status of the study being implemented, the products, any products developed out of that, and the key findings. And so still for monitoring purposes, we continue to use the platforms of technical working groups, SR, HR, the regional partner meetings. We continue to use the academia, research institutions. We continue to drum this up, still disseminating. Disseminating is a continuous process, but also in that, we are still trying to track who is using what, and in case they have any findings, that those are still the same platforms we are using to share the findings. So for the tracking, we are also tagging it to the implementation of the CIP2. We are tagging it there because CIP2 is, as it's being implemented, it's being monitored. So during the review meetings, we also come in and ask partners what they are doing as far as the research and learning agenda is concerned. So that is it for Uganda.
And before you pass the mic back, is that easy or hard? Everything you just explained. How easy is that to really realize?
I will not say it's hard or easy, but I'm going to stretch it to a point of partner stakeholder involvement from the start. It is as important because if these people were part of the process, development process, the dissemination process, this is the same family planning space we are dealing with. So because they've been part of the process, it kind of gives us traction at the end because they are the same kind of people we've been working with from the start, right from its development. So they've appreciated its importance, they've appreciated what it takes to make it work, and so they are willing to have it implemented. And when you are monitoring, they are willing to be cooperative.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure we'll dig in a little bit more to still how easy or hard that is. For Dr. Haru, what is the significance of having government in the driver's seat for this process? What did that mean to you? And a second part of that question, how did you negotiate consensus when you had so many different people around the table deciding on priority research questions?
Merci, Trinity.
Thank you. It's true, and it's something that was done very meticulously. It's extremely important to get everyone together in order to have a global collective vision. So we invited all the partners to join us, as I mentioned earlier, civil society as well, youth, as well as the technical and financial um, partners, USAID, USAID, all the different partners. So we had meetings with all of those actors and spoke about data that had already been produced, data that touched upon the different issues that were priorities. So we had these consultations with the different partners, and that allowed us to validate some of the questions. And I think it's important to do this because often academics are on one side and the government is on another. Researchers produce evidence, but the government ignores it. That's what happens often. So, in order to advocate for the use of this data, you need to talk to the government. Dynamics have to change. That's how we did it, is how you government can be involved in the process from the beginning. The government has its reasons to support this research, and the community also being involved meant that we had a common vision. And so the use of this data becomes easier, as is its dissemination. So it was something very interesting, in my opinion. And I would like to add that this agenda even inspired other agendas, because the Ouagadougou group decided that an additional agenda would be needed to take into account all the different programs that revolve around family planning. And that was the basis for our work for a workshop we held in Connacht in October.
You might have heard Mariba talking about this regional research and learning agenda for the Ouagadougou Partnership. And so there's an interesting opportunity to have dialogue about regional level priorities and country level priorities and how those come together. Now a question for Emeka. You hinted at this, I think, in your remarks, but how do you see USAID leveraging these RLAs for future investments? And do you think that the RLAs themselves can lead to increased funding for family planning research?
Thank you. As a research division of the Office of Population and Reproductive Health at USAID, the Research Technology Utilization Division, the RTU, wants to fund targeted research in family planning so that we're not just designing research from what we think, we design research from existing evidence. So we want to produce documents that have potentials for use, like I said during the initial presentation, that have impacts and use on designing interventions, on making policies, on clinical services, on even further research to refine what works. because by then people will start respecting, for lack of a better word to use, research outputs and know their utility in those implementation activities that we're all involved in every day. And those respects will come when the impacts become clear. If they are targeted, then they are shepherded to meet those targeted impacts. And people will ask for more research. If we're not seeing any impact on the research we are doing, next time when you talk about research, I mean, people will like, okay, so what do we need this research for? If we show that research has impact, before people will design programs, they want to see research that supports that, and they will work towards it. So we believe and we know that RLAs will continue to play critical roles in investment decisions by USAID. At RTU, we are beginning to plan co-creation activities with missions, because we know that most research that missions use to implement programs are centrally funded, produced, and disseminated. And one of the things we've learned from RLAs is that if the missions are not involved in those research, then they don't know how to fuse it into programs. So we're starting co-creation activities with missions so that we know what they want, we'll learn where the gaps are, and then we design awards that helps them to design, implement, and monitor their programs. So RLAs will help to make informed decisions, and USAID will continue to support RLAs to make sure that those targeted decisions are made in program implementations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Emeka. So I have more questions that I can ask, but I'd rather see at this point if there are questions from the audience. So if you have a question for anyone here, you can go to the microphone and ask so that people can hear for interpretation. And if not, I will keep going with mine. But I see people standing up. Yay, thank you. Oh my gosh, so many people. Good thing I stopped.
So it was great to hear from, my name's Danny Resar, I'm from the Clinton Health Access Initiative. It was great to hear from Dr. Faru how the research learning agenda included civil society organizations. And I wonder if Dr. Faru or any of the other speakers on the panel have any reflections on how we can engage communities in the development of these research agendas, either in the processes you've already done or moving forward. And thank you for the great presentations.
Merci. Les communautés, c'est extrêmement important.
Thank you. Community is extremely important. And usually, I said this earlier, the subject is considered as a research object. So it's not clear from the beginning. If we really want to understand the needs of the population, the first thing we need to do is listen to them. So we use focus groups in the communities to gather and understand their priorities. That's what we did in order to understand what they think and then move on to planning. Because there are social rules that can be difficult, of course. But it's important to listen to community leaders. We have, for example, religious leaders who are well respected. It's important to know their ideas, their opinions from the very beginning. It's also important to listen to traditional leaders who are the people who convey traditional values, and it's important to work with them as well. And then we have female groups at the local level. And it's interesting to talk to them in order to make the family planning agenda move forward. It's easier for the government to create this program and put it into practice if these things are done. So that's why for us at country level, we have developed a national strategy for the health community. And it includes all of these questions that we develop, including questions about family planning. Is that okay?
I think one way to do that is we found this, the convening of the technical advisory networks a very powerful way to engage. You can be very intentional who you invite to that. And I guess the question is who best at if you're doing a global level, who best represents those communities? I think it's different at the global level, but I think there's opportunity to do that through associations or organizations. And it's a great question. Thanks.
Yes, from a country level experience, it's always like Laura said, it's always good to be to have targeted engagements. Who are you engaging? So, for example, if you're looking for a certain community, these sort of technical working groups have representations of those communities. So you look out for the groups that have the sort of communities that you want to target and engage those. That's what we've been doing for Uganda, to have an inclusion of the various communities.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the really interesting session and practical session too. My name is Kate Sheehan and I'm a senior technical advisor at JSI. I was wondering if there is a forum for donors to share and collaborate on learning agendas or learning agenda priorities, perhaps to share, collaborate, and reinforce, maybe even endorse a larger level learning agenda across family planning or different areas of family planning. I can imagine that there would be benefits to doing that and that there would be challenges from the donor perspective, but also from the implementing partners' perspectives, and I'd be curious to hear some thoughts on that.
Thank you for that question, and I think some of the issues coming out from the presentation did address some of those. We funded both country level RLAs and global level ones, and across donors. All right, okay. So we need to understand, and we know, first of all, that donors have their priorities and what they want to focus on at any point in time. But that said, there's a lot of discussions that go on behind among donors, especially where those priorities cross and meet each other. There has not been discussions on RLAs, and I don't know any other donor funding RLAs at this point and at the scale that we have done it. I'm sure that will be very open. The CIMC RLA was funded and supported by two separate projects of USAID. Now it hasn't involved another donor, but that shows that collaborations are possible. So depending on how RLAs are started, depending on how the concept came about, either from a donor or from a partner or from a project, there are always potentials for collaborations because it's always important to bring every single stakeholder to the table, whether they are all donors or implementers or governments or civil society. If everybody sits on the table, they make common decisions, then they also take common responsibilities in implementing it. I think they should have gone way long past where an individual donor or project sets research agenda and then we're struggling to disseminate it and tell everybody this is how it should be done. If we have everybody on the table in the first instance, then you don't need to go tell anybody do this. Everybody knows what to do. So I would say yes, such opportunities exist, and I'm sure we're happy to collaborate to make that happen.
I'll just add, I think for the hormonal IUD global research and learning agenda, that one did have USAID and Gates funding that went into it. And I wonder if Dr. Haru or Sarah would like to comment on participants in the country level. I know invitations were made to a range of donors. I don't necessarily know if they all came and participated in the development of the RLAs, but certainly I think invitations were put out to UNFPA and other both donor agencies and multilateral.
Yes. PA and USAID. So those were our main donors that participated in the development of the RLA. Yes.
Ok, au Niger également.
Yeah, in Niger, the same thing happened because the dynamic went through the same two donors. They participated quite strongly with financing, and this agenda also had the participation of CIP, and we're going to organize a round table for the partners soon, so that there's a global view. That way partners can express their opinions about the agenda. And CPI, for example, is mobilizing partners around this subject. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really hopeful. So my name is Michael Cohen. I'm a serial MNE director for projects and usually add secretly, unless it's on my business card, research to that. Why? Because the typical life cycle of, in my experience of a project has been, woo, we get to do so much cool stuff. There's all this stuff that we're doing in activities and this is going to be great. This isn't a research project. Secretly asking some questions, getting some data, and then showing some results. Getting people excited. Oh, can we also ask this? Can we learn about that? Well, it's the last year of the project. Wouldn't that have been great if we had incorporated this early? And it's frustrating. And there's so much opportunity. And I would also say that I think this group, the reproductive health, the population, has been the most supportive. And so that's why I feel comfortable saying this here and saying, what advice do you have for somebody like me? You know, we're in the final years of, I'm on the PSM project, and so we've gotten to do this, and this has been really exciting. I don't know what comes next. So, any advice?
Just to, sorry, oh, don't walk away. I wanted to just try to ask a clarifying question, if you could. More, can you target the advice?
Yeah, it was gooey what I said,
No,
I'm
it's okay.
sorry.
If you could target the advice that you're looking for. Is the question about how projects can do better at addressing research questions or something?
Maybe it's how do we talk together better? And when I say we, I think I mean more the donor. How do we establish that communications early on, that research involves a learning agenda and it involves budgets. Papers shouldn't be written on airplanes and on weekends, but they do have to be written, because whether or not we're talking about high rigor or low rigor, I don't think the gray research is an appropriate place as an end goal. And it just doesn't get out, and it doesn't get reviewed. It doesn't get peer reviewed. And so how do we do research in a way, even if it's not a research project, so that people are comfortable with it? It doesn't scare people, and I can bring it up and say, look, in order to answer the questions you have, let's find out what those are, as you've been saying, and here's what it's going to take. It's going to take this budget. It's going to take, you know, this goal. I don't know. Is there a way to have that conversation without shooting myself in the foot?
Thank you. My understanding of your question is approaching RLA discussions from conducting research itself. And RLA precedes the research conduct. I mean, my early knowledge of RLAs were research priorities setting activities. So in this area, what are the priority research agendas? What question do we want answered now to help us implement programs? And when we have that list, if you may call it, then it informs research, the kind of research that is needed in the now to do programs. Now that said, if you have an implementation grant, your cooperative agreement will usually tell you whether you can do research with it or not, and the kind of research you can do with it. And especially at bilateral level, the level of research you can do will fall within the domain of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And there are a lot of leeways in evaluation. You can design implementation research when you are doing program evaluation without turning your program into a research, right? Because most people who are reviewing what you spent your money on, they're not program people, and they don't care about research. They want to look at your contract and see how you have implemented it. So there are a lot of clear approaches to use your evaluation, program evaluation, whether they are baseline, formative research, or midterm or end-line evaluation of your implementation projects to answer very important research questions without violating that contractual need not to do research with your grant. I don't know if this talks anything close to what you're saying.
Thanks. And I think just to reiterate what Emeka said, it seems to me that if we do go through the process of co-creating research agendas, then in and of itself, being able to point to these being questions of interest should help facilitate more acceptance of funding those questions by the donors. That may be a bit optimistic, but I like to think so. I think there's another person with a question.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Sarah Pennington. I'm a technical advisor at Palladium and working on the new Propel Health program. And I'm contributing to setting up the monitoring, evaluation, and learning platform and system and our indicators and our CLA, and we're kind of envisioning it all fitting together in a sort of hub learning CLA, M&E, all of it kind of together. And I guess my question is, do you have any recommendations or suggestions for ways that we can integrate or incorporate our global research and learning agenda with our country-specific ones into our routine ongoing M&E framework, CLA, like ways to make sure that it doesn't fall off the agenda when we have so many other things that we have to do at these routine CLA and pause and reflect moments to ensure that we are implementing and course correcting. I can totally envision it sort of going to the bottom of the agenda, especially if we don't have the funding for research, like research, as your presentation pointed out, it's not funded as much as it used to be. So any recommendations for having an internal M&E framework that prioritizes the learning agenda? Thank you.
I'm not sure, it's a really tough, good question. I'm not sure I can answer it sufficiently. I mean, I think one of the challenges is tracking how these get used. You know, how do you measure the application and use of these? And I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know that there is one single answer for that. I think part of it is sensitization to the RLAs and you know, having them exist and physically have them and sensitize people to them. One of the things we've found, and one of the reasons why these research spotlights have been so useful and powerful, is it's people, you're sort of superimposing the RLA on what people are already doing. And so they realize, oh, I'm already contributing evidence to this like very important question. And that, I don't know that there's a great efficient way of doing that from an M&E perspective, but I think it's sort of helping people see themselves as contributing to it with what they're already doing, or maybe and highlighting what they're doing and what the tools that they're using. I'm not sure that answered your question, but I'm sure there's.
Bien, merci. Peut-être je vais ajouter.
Thank you. I'd like to add something to her comment. It is important that these agendas can be used. And we need to keep working, as I said it before, in connection to the government and the researchers. Because sometimes research are already done. We have many research from the universities, etc. And we have this academic research, we have some progress. That's good, but what's the relevability and what's the input for the community? So the idea is to create this bridge between the partners, the government, and the researchers. They need to be together so that they can have an idea of the needs of the community. So the government is the user of these data, and they need to have the knowledge of these data, and they can finance a certain number of research because they are convinced of that. So I think that they can mobilize the domestic resources. And that's why at this level we have developed an agenda of research with 9 countries, and we have some focal points in the government, focal points in the partners, focal point for the youth and the civil society. And we need to look for researchers in those groups. So I think that's easier to go and to look for the agenda and to have a certain sustainability. So that's my comment.
The two previous questions have kind of partly answered, rather brought up the issues which brought me from my chair. And I was struggling to, I'm Frederick Makumbi. I work with Makerere University School of Public Health, the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. That's where I'm an associate professor, but I'm also part of the and co-team lead for R4S in Uganda and team lead for PMA Uganda. So as I listened, I was kind of taken aback by the first R, research. And I said, oh, if I'm an implementing partner, where does research fit in? And I have all this massive data. And I said to myself, do we see ourselves kind of redefine or explain what that R means? That is not necessarily traditional research, but we think that monitoring, evaluation, and impact evaluation should be part of this. And I think it should be clearly explained so that we don't lose out on all this data, because this RL is being monitored via implementing partners out there who have a limited appreciation initially, who may have an appreciation of the typical research, the way it's understood. My last comment is, again, it costs money. This thing costs money. So I think we need to think about also, when Trinity asked about the challenges, my mind went back to Uganda. I said, okay, I think we have discussed this a bit with Sarah and the team, and said it's going to cost some bit of money, so resources are not going to be ignored, even as we do all this monitoring of this area over. Thank you very much.
Awesome. I think unless there are any burning last questions, I should be like the good teacher and let everybody go a few minutes early on this last day of the conference. Oh, we have a burning question though. Okay.
Hi, sorry.
Good student.
Sneak in right at the end. I'm Kirsten. I'm from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation in our EME team, so we are trying to fund some of this work. And I guess my question is really a little bit kind of to get your advice. And when we consider how we spend some of our EME budget, a lot of it goes down to kind of different pots. So to kind of ask from the panel, if you were to allocate across like monitoring and data versus evaluation, and I'm going to put research in there as well, so kind of the more rigorous, and then the learning, so whether it be in-project learnings, how would you allocate, like just a percentage split, like where do you think we should be focusing on? Obviously, each project and circumstances dependent, so I know I'm asking quite a high-level question, but yeah, interested in where you think the gaps are and where the need is.
Well, thank you. I don't think that there's any allocation formula for awards for research, evaluation, and learning that's reputed. Every award or program has a design that has been agreed by both the IP and the funder. I think that at that point of design, that's when the partner has an opportunity to propose the importance of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and how the level of priority they think should be given to it, and propose a funding allocation formula that will be on the table for discussion when you are having such an agreement with your management team on that award. If you're able to justify 50% of it and they agree with you, then good luck, you have a ton of money to do all of that. But then I think when I was on the implementation side, the rule of thumb just says 10%. Just make sure you have about 10% allocated to learning, however you want to apply that learning and whatever you want to call it, so that those learning will continuously inform your implementation. You should be able to take 3 steps forward and 1 step back to look at what you've done before you move forward, so you don't get to the end and everybody's wondering, oh, why didn't you see that this was going to fail? Thank you.
I can't answer from the donor side in terms of how that's allocated. What I would say is I think what would be ideal is to leave some portion for implementation research. Could be a very small pot, because I think, and this gets to your point, as you implement the program, that's when some of the refinement of some of the RLA questions come in, and having some money set aside to be able to do that, I think would address some of the issues you're talking about. So whatever the amount is, in addition to the M&E, I think having sort of a pot of money to really look at some of the implementation research that comes up during implementation would be great.
Okay. We got the 3-minute mark.
We got 3, okay.
So if it can fit in 3 minutes.
I think the answer to this is going to be very short.
Okay.
USAID, and there are other US agencies that fund research, and they have very different objectives and agendas. Is there any opportunity to marry these ever? For instance, could the NIH work with a USAID project to actually support research that they might also, that inform some of their questions, but wouldn't impinge upon the budget, the objectives of the USAID project? And is that even possible?
The straightforward response is yes. There are interagency agreements between various agents of USAID that collaborates in producing research and surveys. We have interagency agreement with U.S. Census Bureau. We have with NIH and HSS, Department of State. It happens all the time, so it's a yes.
All right, I'd like everybody to please join me in thanking our awesome presenters and speakers, and thank you all for coming.